Hi, I'm Kenji.
And I'm Vic Moss we're both with the DSPA Alliance, Drone Service Provider Alliance. And today we are honored to have a very special guest with us today, Mr. Mickey Osterreicher. Mickey, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me. So yes, my name is Mickey Osterreicher. I am the general counsel for the National Press Photographers Association. Before I became a lawyer, I was a photojournalist in both print and broadcast for about 40 years. I deal with a lot of issues on behalf of visual journalists. NPPA has been around since 1946. I've been a member since 1973, but we deal with issues regarding, the right to record, the police performing their official duties in a public place, cameras in the courtroom, and then really that led me to been working on drones for quite a few years because I look at it as the kind of the next natural progression in news gathering. It certainly levels the playing field. Before only big TV stations could afford to get aerials unless you were lucky enough to be on an assignment and as an individual photographer and have your client be willing to rent an aircraft for you. And it's just so important getting that overview. I mean, it's the reason after a natural disaster, when the governor, the president, whoever comes to town, what's the first thing they do? Take to the air. So, seeing it from the ground is certainly one perspective, but you don't get to appreciate the kind of devastation that may occur unless you get that aerial view. And being able to use a drone now certainly makes that a whole lot easier for independent journalists, as well as television stations and newspapers, because it's certainly much more a safe and economical way. The example I use is you've got a forest fire 50 miles outside LA. Does it make sense to fly a Bell Jet Ranger out, at $1,500 an hour to make 3 or 4 orbits and get high definition and fly back to the station versus you've got a crew on the ground coordinating with the incident commander, and when there's no firefighting operations, that same crew puts a drone up, gets the same high quality video, and is able to do the same things with it at a much less cost and much less danger to the pilot and the crew on a Bell Jet Ranger. So yeah, it's the kinds of things that we've been involved in for a while, and of course, now we're looking at not only safety issues and First Amendment issues, but we're looking at privacy issues. And that's, again, something that's been around forever. It's not so much the drones, it's the fact that they can carry a high definition camera now. I don't think people cared so much about remote controlled aircraft. They've been around for 60 years and people have been flying them and nobody cared. But now we've got GPS and we've got a stable platform and it's really cheap. And the biggest thing is you got high definition images. And now all of a sudden it's, oh my God, which is the same thing that happened in the late 1800s when George Eastman invented the Brownie. And the same people did the same thing. Oh my God, the right to privacy as we know it is over, because prior to that, you either sat with your neck in a brace and held still for 5 minutes in a photo studio, because that's how long the exposures had to be, or you had big cameras, that went out with Matthew Brady in the fields of the Civil War. But now you could, for $1, buy this camera and go out in the street and take pictures. And as I said, people were aghast. And what was interesting is that Louis Brandeis, when he was a Harvard Law student, wrote this treatise called Right to Privacy. And if you Google Brandeis Right to Privacy and read it, you'll think they're talking about drones today. Because aside from the flowery language, they talk about the nosy neighbors and the snooping press, and nothing's changed in 140 years.
Yeah, very true.
There you go.
And I agree with you 100%. Any new technology, as you said, Kodak, that was a huge one. There's also cell phone cameras. That's another one. People panicked about cars when they first came around. So any new technology, there's always a technology panic, and there's a technology panic cycle where it's first like fear and then legislation in response to the fear. and then suddenly there's societal acceptance, and then sort of things sort of died down. It becomes part
I
of
think the problem these days is that, back then, when the Tin Lizzie came out, like, oh my God, what are the horses going to do? Or, steam locomotives. The law had to catch up, but technology was going at a fairly human pace.
Yeah.
And now, technology is going at this exponential rate. And then we've got the Congress that can't agree as to whether it's daytime or nighttime outside, and they're moving at this glacial speed. And so the divide between trying to get legislation or case law, related to the technology, it's a challenge. It'll happen, but we're getting there. But
Getting there slowly.
much more slowly than the technology is moving. That's for sure.
Perfect.
And
Oh, go ahead, Kenji.
no, this is a perfect segue. We're talking about bad laws, bad decisions, and there was one recent one, the Long Lake Township versus Maxon. Do you want to talk about the implications and just give us a little background?
Yeah, again, the police were doing surveillance, and we've had lots of case law of issues of police doing surveillance. Before it was with the manned aircraft. There's not a whole lot of rulings on, but it's like, where do you have that reasonable expectation of privacy? And on the ground, it's pretty clear cut. On the ground, if you're in public, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy. And it's why we're photographed and recorded dozens or more times a day by surveillance cameras. It's why police dash cams and body cameras can be used. It's why news photographers can take pictures in public. It's why anyone with a cell phone camera can take a picture in public. Now, what you do with those images afterwards can get you in some trouble. Yeah. But you can actually take pictures. In France, you can't take a picture of a person without their permission in public. So,
wow.
So our privacy laws are different, and our privacy laws differ from state to state. There was an interesting case in New York State a number of years ago. And this gentleman lived in an apartment building, and he took pictures out his window, and the people at the building across from him was all glass. And he was a fine art photographer, and the pictures are just amazing. But there were a couple that he took where there were children, and they were right up against the plane of the window, and you couldn't see their faces. You could see an arm or a leg because they were playing with the curtains. And they're really cute pictures, but the parents sued. And in New York State, sorry, First Amendment, those kinds of things trump privacy issues. Other states are different. So in Michigan, the whole idea here is that case that you mentioned came about under a violation of the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable search and seizure. Was the observations that were made in order for them to bring this case against him an invasion of his privacy in terms of a reasonable expectation of privacy as it pertained to this criminal matter. But what we ended up seeing from the appellate decision is something that's got far broader implications in terms of where those rights are. And again, the ability of a municipality to control airspace, whereas the FAA has always asserted they have federal preemption. It's a federal rule. It's like copyright. You can't bring a copyright case in state court. You can, but it'll get thrown out because it's a federal law. It's got to go to federal court. Same thing here. When the FAA seems to want to assert authority, they certainly talk about that they control the national airspace from a blade of grass up into the heavens. And the question is that 400 foot between the ground and the limits of where an unmanned aerial system, aerial vehicle, or drone can operate. That's the question. And when you've got municipalities saying nothing can operate below 400 feet, and the FAA saying nothing can operate above 400 feet, you've basically got a ban on the use. And it'll be interesting to see whether or not this case gets appealed, whether or not the FAA weighs in, in terms of preemption. So we'll see.
One of the things in what 2015, I think it was 2016, the FAA put out their fact sheet for states and city control of the national airspace. And one of the things they said that states and cities can do is make it necessary to have a warrant for surveillance for law enforcement. So that aspect of the law, I don't think really surprised anybody. Well, the ruling, sorry, because you're supposed to have a warrant to surveil stuff. I mean, that's life in law enforcement. But yeah, the other implications that came with it, the reasoning behind what the judges were, really raised a lot of eyebrows last month when this came out. Can you address some of those?
It's interesting. It's the first court ruled one way, court of appeals ruled, the appellate court ruled another way. We may get another decision if the case gets appealed. I think that they went too far. I think it's certainly got First Amendment implications for people in terms of what their rights are. But I think one of the questions we're going to need to have addressed at some point is where in that airspace you've got some privacy rights and where you don't. And it's an issue we've been dealing with, as you know, Vic, for a number of years. It started with the NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Agency, about privacy rights, because the FAA basically deals with safety, and they kind of kicked the can, and President Obama gave them a mandate in Congress, like, well, let's look into this. And we were involved in those discussions, and they came up with a bunch of best practices regarding that. But we got them to include nothing in this. These best practices supersedes First Amendment guarantees. And then we saw it again with the Uniform Law Commission, where they again started out with these kind of privacy rights and trespass rights and property rights. And, we're moving along. Again, we participated, and I have to give them a lot of credit, given the time and effort that they put into it. And the one thing that was nice, I do have to say, is that both the FAA and the DOT both sent them letters saying, you guys are getting into areas that we have preemption over. And I think they took that into consideration. I think, again, we got them to consider First Amendment rights, which I think is important. And when I say First Amendment, it's not just freedom of the press. The whole idea of free speech, people don't think about that. Photography, videography is included under that, because photography, videography are forms of expression, and without having that freedom of expression, you can't have speech.
Yep.
So that's how the First Amendment protects those rights. And I think it's really an important consideration. So the ULC, at the end of the day, even though they spent a lot of time and energy, said, you know what, we can't get a consensus here, so we're just dropping this whole Drone Tort Law Act, which would have tried to create, some type of template for all of the states to take a look at, to see, what that was going to be. And again, it was who's got rights, where do they end, where do they start, and now we're looking at the American Law Institute, ALI. Again, their property rights section is looking at the same types of things. When are you committing a trespass? When you're in the airspace, if you don't have permission. I mean, one of the things that we got involved in, again, in California, they came up with a law, and you had to get permission of all the property owners. And we said, so like if you're overflying a condo, do you have to go to each one of the condo homeowners and get, it's untenable. And when you're in the air, how do you know whose property is public? I mean, there's just no way of knowing. So I think, one of the things that's important to keep in mind is, I guess, and I think we'll end up having to deal with this jurisprudence, is how long you're there. Whether it's just an overflight, whether you come every day and are sitting there for 20 minutes, whether you're there constantly. I think, there's a good Supreme Court case on GPS and the Fourth Amendment as to how long can you track somebody a little bit? Yes. Can you track somebody constantly all the time? No. And I have a feeling, and I talked about this years ago, I think that's the way things will shake out, at least for the Fourth Amendment, and it's dealing with drones. But the bigger issue is going to be where in the air is public airspace, almost the same thing as a traditional public forum on the ground, which is subject to what's known as reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. And where's private property? And wait a minute, I own this. I have the use and enjoyment of it. You're disturbing that. And greater minds than mine will have to figure that out.
Yeah, they're wearing black robes, and that's who's going to be doing it, I bet.
But that makes total sense in terms of a fact-specific analysis and making that inquiry, whether something bad happened or whatever. Because I think the way that a lot of folks are saying there's a property right and they want a bright line rule because it just makes the lives easier for plaintiffs' attorneys, to be honest. Oh, you went below a certain space. Oh, yeah, we can sue you, and that's done. Right. But a fact-specific analysis is just a little bit more involved and creates more work. So I think there's that element too, which then brings up the concept of avigation easements. And of course, one of the things, have you been able to take a look at the new Texas bill 3403 that talks about avigation easements? And can you just tell us?
Yeah, I mean, again, where the FAA's kind of seeded things is I think they're saying, and they've said this all along, a municipality can regulate where things can land and take off from. It's why they get to decide where an airport could be located or a heliport. And again, we saw that as the avigation laws in New York City, which came into play during the beginning of the pandemic when people were using drones to take pictures of all the bodies that were being buried on Hart Island. And really the only way to get there, if you couldn't get a helicopter or a fixed wing to fly over, it was with a drone. And people were being cited for, well, you took off from New York City and you're not allowed to without permission, except in very few areas. We were involved in a number of those cases. All the charges ended up getting dismissed. So in terms of Texas, I think they've gone beyond that. They're now talking about what you can't fly over. So it's not just the landing and the taking off. They're now saying you can't fly over this, you can't fly over that. We've seen that happen in a number of states where it's like critical infrastructure, and they basically include everything in the whole world. A bridge is a critical infrastructure, an oil refinery is a critical, a hospital, and it's like, at what point is it really a critical infrastructure? And, again, flying over it, taking pictures of it, how do we distinguish that? Whether or not we've seen some cases where in New York, again, somebody was cited for photographing through a hospital window. When they looked into the case, the drone was up. He was on an assignment and the camera was facing exactly opposite the hospital, photographing the thing that he was contracted to shoot. And just because it was there and somebody looked out the window and went, oh my God, there's a drone out my window and it's taking pictures of me. Well, it wasn't. It was facing the other way. So, I mean, there's just so many things to be sorted out here. But I do have a problem with, that the new bill in Texas on that, just as the segue into Texas, we've challenged, for those of you who don't know, the Texas drone law on surveillance. We basically said, sorry, it's overly broad, it's vague, it's unconstitutional in terms of First Amendment rights. It was interesting through the process where Texas has all these exemptions to the drone law. They're like from A to S. And there was one there, T, that talked about journalists, but they struck that out because there's certain powers in Texas that didn't want journalists to be exempted from that. And so, you know, we survived a challenge on a motion to dismiss. The judge did dismiss because we brought the federal preemption claim. They did dismiss that, but we're still moving forward on the First Amendment claims. And, you know, we've had great support in terms of amicus briefs, and we're hoping in the next stages that we'll have additional support. So, you know, things are happening. So it's just going to be a matter of time and getting people to make the right decisions, getting judges and courts to have something explained to them. That's the benefit of an amicus brief, is that, you know, somebody that is there to try and educate the court on, look, this is what we're really talking about here. This is why it's more important than just the facts in these cases. And that's what we're seeing. You know, Texas keeps coming up with these bills. Yeah, I certainly think that they're doing things that are improper, and we hope that at some point the FAA, you know, will weigh in, because it's so important. I mean, the FAA came into being, so we didn't have this patchwork of aviation laws across the United States. So when you were flying over Kansas, it was one thing, and you got to Nebraska and it changed. And yet for drones, that's exactly what's happening. So you got one community that says nothing below 250. The next one says nothing above 300. So now you got a 50-foot difference, and they're all next to each other. They all abut each other, and you're supposed to know, all right, no, I can't, up, down. The reason that they came into being was so we didn't see that, so that there was this seamless national airspace. The question is, how far down does it come? Or how far up does the ground property rights go?
Yeah, it is going to be something that we really all have to keep an eye on closely. I have not been following the Texas bill that the NPPA is involved in, because I know you're involved. I don't have to worry about it. You know, you'll let us know what's going on. NPPA is going to be out there fighting for all of us, not just press photographers, which is really kind of cool. Is there any? Do you have an idea when the next step in the Section 423 fight is going to be in Texas?
Yeah, so right now we're doing discovery requests on both sides. There's a limit to that. Discovery's like, give us some information. We've asked that from the state. They've asked that from us. And then, as I said, we already had the motion to dismiss by the state. And usually what happens after that is there's a motion for summary judgment, which basically means, given all the facts in this, that there's no dispute in the facts, and the court just looks at, here's the law, here's the standard, which under the First Amendment is usually the standard of review is strict scrutiny. It's like, is the law constitutional or is the law unconstitutional? If it's unconstitutional, they strike it down, and then the legislature can go back to the drawing board and, you know, either come up with a new law, and oftentimes the court will kind of give them this blueprint of, this is why it's unconstitutional, wink, wink. So if you change this, if you adjust that, come back with a new law, it'll pass constitutional muster. It's interesting, in Texas, the legislature meets every other year. So they're back meeting this year, and whether they, you know, work on another bill in the meantime, I don't know, but that's kind of where we're at, you know. And so this is really the first state law challenge. Obviously, with Singer v. Newton, we saw a challenge in one community. One federal district court made a ruling. It's nice to kind of look at it, and people can get some ideas from the briefings and from the decision, but it's not controlling anywhere else except in that district. So you need laws with a broader implication, but you want the law to be favorable, obviously. Having a bad law, like apply to the whole state of Michigan, is worrisome.
Yeah.
Um,
Now,
Well, I want to
put-
posit that. I'm sorry. Let me do this. I want to posit this. We're not going to answer this because we don't have time today. One of the interesting things about the Michigan one is it talked about how intrusive drones are as opposed to aircraft, manned aircraft. And as a photographer myself, Kenji as well, it's, I've got the drone. Drone's got a wide angle. Yeah, you have some drones. You can put telephotos on, that kind of thing. But if I'm at 400 feet with my Mavic 2 Pro, as opposed to 1,500 feet hanging out of a Cessna or helicopter with a 600 millimeter lens on it, that totally negates the intrusiveness of the drone visually, or not visually, but photographically. So it's going to be interesting to see where that falls.
Yeah, or if you got a helicopter with a Tyler camera mount
Oh,
with
yeah.
a huge zoom lens,
Yeah,
that can
60
come
power
in,
zooms on
you
those
know,
things.
and then you can look at some of the images from Google Earth and like, okay, so they shot it from space.
Exactly.
You have more right to privacy, less right to privacy.
It's going to be
somebody-
interesting to see
yeah,
where it
but
lands.
I again talk about that whole, it's different, it's intrusive. I just laugh because paparazzi has been used as this pejorative term for photographers, and it comes from La Dolce Vita. Signor Paparazzi was a very annoying photographer, and in Italian it means annoying insect. Well, a drone probably sounds more like an annoying insect than anything else. I'd much rather have, my wife and I were on a walk the other day. We went, okay, we know that sound. And we looked up and there was a guy out in his backyard and he was just playing with his drone, but we knew the noise. We've had a helicopter in our neighborhood that's probably at about 500 feet and is probably doing some type of grid mapping. And on Sunday morning, it's flying back and forth in its grid pattern. To me, that was far more annoying for 2 hours in the morning than this little bzzz that was going on from the drone. So yeah, I think it's a matter of perspective, but I'm not necessarily sure I agree with their analysis in terms of the qualitative and quantitative difference of drones and manned aircraft.
And I agree on that point. I mean, you look at some of the Predator drones that were deployed this past summer, and you can't hear them, yet they can see things like really tiny. They can zoom in on license plates and stuff. So those tools are out there too. But I did have a question for you. The question had to do, why was the preemption claim dismissed in the Texas suit? Was it just not relevant to the First Amendment analysis, or what was the rationale?
The judge's analysis, which I think was wrong, but he's the judge and I'm not, but that's, was I don't think he completely understood the preemption idea. And I think it was wrongly decided. But again, we're happy that the main allegations that we had in our complaint survived.
Okay.
So it was more to do with kind of whether this was a broad area or a narrow area in terms of the preemption, in terms of the control over the airspace. So I think he misunderstood that, but that's why there are appeals courts. And exactly. I'm not sure that we're necessarily at this point going to appeal that part of the decision. There's nothing to appeal yet because we still are in the district court and we have to get through the case because there are different procedures. And as I said, we're up to the discovery and then possibly motion for summary judgment.
Well, can we have you back when that happens?
Sure.
Not that the whole industry won't know about it right away, but yeah.
I'm always happy to drone on.
There you go. Love it. Uh-oh. Now we owe copyright people. We know a couple of people that use that. Mickey, I want to say thank you. It's awesome to have you here. And for those of you in the industry who don't know Mickey, you don't know who you're missing out on. He fights for us at many levels. It's not, like I said, it's not just press photographers that should value his knowledge and his hard work in the industry.
Well, thank you very
Yeah.
much. And, for those of you who don't know about NPPA, please look into it. NPPA.org. I'm not trying to sell anything, but we can't do what we do without member support. So, yeah, I mean, obviously you're running out of time. I know the other issue we were talking about was Piney Point and down in Tampa where there's a TFR up. And there's certain exemptions for the press, but that was manned aircraft. But I certainly think there's a point we can push, and we've made that argument that, hey, I've told people that, look at the part of the CFR and see if they can get a waiver. So.
Yeah. I think having that's a very good thing to end on as well, is that having, revisiting this Piney Point issue and the devastation that will likely follow this, and seeing how the TFRs play out there with not only just the press, but search and rescue, that kind of thing. Of course, search and rescue obviously can get by that, but it'll be fun to follow that one as well.
Mm-hmm.
You lead a fun life, Mickey. I have to say.
It's always something, but
Yep.
I'm glad to be able to do it. So thank you so much for having me. And let me know if you need anything else.
We will, definitely. We'll make sure the NPPA has a link down below in the description. And everybody out there flies safe. This has been Vic and Kenji and Mickey with DSPA. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thanks.
Thank you.